Hello, everyone, and welcome to Tabor Talk. So, lie after lie after lie. So, Trump gave this um, economic policy speech in Detroit, if you could call it that. Um, Absolutely disastrous and basically just making stuff up. Absolutely making crap now, I've done so many videos on this guy. Donald Trump is not a businessman. He's a fraud. He's an absolute fraud. In fact, he inherited $400 million. We all know the story. And if he actually just invested it smartly, like safe stocks, safe investments, he'd be better off now. I mean, Donald Trump is a fraud, knows nothing about business, knows nothing about how the economy works. And on top of that, he just lies. He just lies about inflation and GDP and on and on and on. All right, so I'm gonna make this a two-parter because it's not that long. It's about 17 minutes long, I think. And I'm gonna show you a clip of from Anthony Davis of the Midas Touch, who breaks down everything Trump said, all the lies, and I'll start here. This is fantastic. Watch.
Trump unveiled his economic plans at the Detroit Economic Club today. He spoke for almost 2 hours.
I think you're going to find some interesting things.
Let's just take the first 5 minutes of this speech and analyze what it was that he said, because there were so many lies just in the first 5 minutes that we wouldn't have time to unpack all of the propaganda and all of the lies that he presented over the entire 2 hours.
Both good and bad, but we make the bad into good. That's what we like to do.
We make the bad into good. Okay, that's an interesting place to start. What?
It was just announced that inflation came in substantially hotter than expected last month. Double what was predicted, with much of the gain coming from food prices going up.
Inflation is double what was predicted. Who said that? I mean, apart from you just making it up there and then, but what are you talking about? Inflation in the United States dropped last month to its lowest point since it first began surging more than 3 years ago because of a worldwide pandemic. Taken as a whole, the September figures show that inflation is already steadily easing back to the Fed's 2% target. That decline suggests the Fed will likely keep cutting its benchmark interest rate this year, with 2 quarter-point reductions in November and December expected by most economists. Not Donald Trump, though. On a positive note, apartment rental prices grew more slowly than last month, a sign that housing inflation is finally cooling, a long-awaited development that would provide relief to many consumers. Overall inflation last month was held down by a big drop in gas prices, which fell 4.1% from August to September.
Interest rates, as you know, are also a big factor. They're very high. They've gone from 2% when I was in office to 10% now, and you can't get the money. That means it's much higher than 10%.
Interest rates? What are you talking about? They were just cut. What does he even mean? Is he just going to say anything and hope that nobody notices? The Federal Reserve cut interest rates by 0.5 percentage point last month. But Donald Trump doesn't mention that. And where does he get 10% or more from? The US interest rate is 5%. You can get a 15-year mortgage for 4.85%. So what is over 10%? That's probably the rate that he can borrow money because lenders know that he is going to default on the loan. After inflation peaked in early 2022, the Federal Reserve repeatedly stated that its goal with aggressive interest rate hikes was to get inflation down to an annual target range of 2%. Well, it's almost there. Today's Consumer Price Index, measuring the cost of food, housing, gas, utilities, and other goods in the month of September, shows annual price growth at 2.4%. The most recent employment report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics showed U.S. hiring exploding past expectations in September. Instead of greater jobless numbers, the unemployment rate ticked down, experts agree that the Fed can and should continue lowering interest rates. This all happened under Joe Biden's presidency, who fortunately was able to steady the ship after Donald Trump crashed the economy during the pandemic.
The fact is that the Federal Reserve brought the interest rates down a little too quickly. It was too big a cut, and everyone knows that was a political maneuver that they tried to do before the election, but they did the wrong thing. It was totally a political decision, and inflation has started to rise.
Oh, okay, so the Fed brought the rates down too quickly now. Well, most economists would disagree with that, but anyway, you just keep pretending that you're an authority when you've gone bankrupt 6 times, you've had dozens of failed businesses, and you've even lost your business license in New York because of fraud. Any American who is truly concerned about inflation should be much more worried about Donald Trump than Kamala Harris. Harris is far more serious about fighting inflation and helping households cope with the high cost of living. Donald Trump doesn't care. What's more, Trump's plan to impose steep tariffs on all imported goods will significantly push up prices and hit consumers hard, especially less wealthy consumers. I mean, he doesn't even know what his tariffs are. He says 10%, 20%, 50%, 1,000%. What does he even mean by that? There's no analysis, there's no projection, there's no financial planning. He's just saying random numbers really loudly in a kind of maniacal fashion and hopes that nobody will check.
I now know the game a little better. You know, I had never been a politician before. I got to the White House. I said, yeah, I've never done this before, but...
If Trump is elected and implements his tariffs and other plans, inflation will probably and quickly rise to an uncomfortable 6 to 9.3% per year from the current 2.5%, according to a respected think tank, with prices climbing a very painful 20% to 28% during Trump's 4 years in office. That means there's a good chance that inflation would rise more in a second Trump term than it has under Joe Biden. Not only that, economists say the higher prices caused by Trump's tariffs will cost the typical American household between $2,600 and $3,900 a year. Rather than focusing on Trump's criticisms about inflation, Americans should be celebrating the fact that inflation has significantly decreased, nearing 2% once again. When we take a clear look at what drove inflation in 2021 and 2022, we can identify 2 key causes. And no, Kamala Harris is not one of them. The first major cause was the COVID-19 pandemic. It forced the closure of thousands of factories worldwide. It severely disrupted supply chains, leading to skyrocketing prices on everything from cars to furniture, and this was happening right around the world. The second cause was Russia's invasion of Ukraine. The conflict drove up global agricultural prices because Ukraine is a major exporter of grain and fertilizer. Additionally, the war sent oil and gas prices soaring, as Russia is a major energy supplier, and the war disrupted energy exports. There was also another significant factor contributing to inflation: corporate profiteering. Many companies exploited the situation, raising prices well beyond what was necessary. This greedflation resulted in record corporate profits, while consumers felt the squeeze. The Economic Policy Institute noted that inflated corporate profits were responsible for about 1/3 of the price increases since the pandemic began. The reality is that the US economy is in solid shape, despite many people feeling frustrated by the higher prices compared to pre-pandemic levels. What many Americans may not realize is that wages have actually been increasing faster than prices, helping to offset some of the inflationary impact. Looking ahead, economists are more concerned about Donald Trump's potential impact on prices than anything to do with Vice President Harris. They fear that Trump's proposed tariffs could cause a spike in prices and spark a trade war that might push the US economy into a recession. Trump has been vocal about 2 major economic policies: significant tax cuts for the wealthiest 1% and corporations, and the imposition of steep tariffs, up to 20% on all imports, including items like TVs, shoes, and bananas, with a staggering 60% tariff on imports from China.
4 years ago, when I left office, we had no inflation. We had virtually, just think of it, we had virtually no inflation for the entire 4 years. So when people made money, that was really their money. It wasn't money that they have to give back to a source that they know nothing about, including government.
Trump claims that foreign companies will foot the bill for these tariffs, but economists consistently argue that this is completely inaccurate. In reality, American consumers will bear the cost through higher prices. Economists warn that a second Trump term could dangerously stoke inflation, driven by his tariffs, policies that would balloon the budget deficit, and his threats to limit the Federal Reserve's ability to control inflation.
I'll cut it off here. This is part one. There's about 10 more minutes. I'll make another video on this. But yeah, this is what we're dealing with. And I just keep saying, how is this race even close? I mean, even, I truly believe Kamala's going to win. I believe a landslide. But the fact that this guy is even allowed to run, is a criminal, and just looking at his track record, absolute disaster. Like, it makes zero sense. So we got a lot of work to do after we defeat him. We gotta start. We gotta heal this country. Okay, end of part one. Part two coming. Peace, everyone. And one other thing, make sure you like and subscribe. It helps with the algorithm, and spread it around. Okay, peace, everyone. Part two coming up.